More than beyond thrilled to welcome to you all this morning to our discussion around monetizing generative AI, innovative pricing strategies for the AI era. So I think it's pretty obvious we have a dream team lined up for you today. That's Ibbaka's Stephen Forth. We got Zuora's Michael Mansard, and Growth Unhinged and OpenView's Kyle Poyar. And today we have quite the unique opportunity this morning. We're just going to be like gathering insights from a remarkable panel of industry leaders who are going to be sharing their expertise and thoughts on monetizing Gen AI. I think as many as you all know, it's a critical challenge facing SaaS companies today. And just with the rapid evolution of AI and AI technologies, it's very essential to understand what trends are emerging, what strategies are proving effective, what we should be vigilant about, and what's happening. And usually with everyone watching a webinar, there is a deck that's going to be placed here on for you guys. But today, this is more of a roundtable discussion, so we'll be focusing more on the conversational aspect of this. Don't fret. As always, the deck we have will be sent to everyone who's registered for the event, even if obviously people that aren't here that obviously can't attend. We'll be sending the recording as well. We'll have that edited out, cut out the fluff and all that, but we'll make it all spruce and spiffy for you. And just a heads up, we'll be throwing out the first poll within the first little bit of this discussion. We'll have a second one towards the second half of it. And then the Q&A is open. Any questions that we don't have the time to answer, we're going to kind of pack all of those questions into an upcoming blog. Therefore, we will unpack those questions and thoughts, and we'll be sharing that with everyone here as well. I also want to mention that Stephen, Michael, and Kyle and myself, we're all more than happy to connect via LinkedIn. So yeah, without any more further ado and stealing these guys' thunder, I'm going to be passing it over to Stephen Forth.
Thank you very much, Liam. Michael, Kyle, we really appreciate you joining us and the larger community today. Why don't we get started with just a few brief introductions? So Michael, can you just say a few words about why you're here and why you care about generative AI and pricing?
Hey, Stephen, thanks for having me. So I'm Principal Director at Zuora and the EMEA Chair of a think tank that's called the Subscribe Institute. It's 1,500 members globally, right? I also have fun, besides Zuora, it happens, as a startup investor, advisory board member, and guest lecturer at INSEAD Business School. And I actually can see that my partner in crime, Prof. Wolfgang Gulaga, is on the call, funny enough. So we co-created a bootcamp called the Subscription Business at INSEAD. And just on the side notes, Zuora monetization suite that helps monetize anything from usage-based subscription bundles and everything in between. So my passion was monetization across industries, and as we mentioned, I saw this boiling plate or petri dish, which is generative AI monetization, and I studied 70 companies to see what are their monetization strategies, and hopefully I can share some insights around that.
Thank you, Michael. Kyle?
Yeah, so I've been in the monetization space for the last 15 years, starting my career at Simon Kucher, and then leading growth at OpenView, where I supported nearly every portfolio company around pricing and packaging. And there's never been a more interesting time in the space than there is right now, given the innovation. I've had the pleasure of being able to work hands-on with some portfolio companies in this working on this exact topic, so it's very timely. And my side passion or passion project is writing a newsletter around studying the playbooks of how the best SaaS companies got where they are today and getting deep into the tactics and strategies and playbooks that they followed. So I do that through a newsletter that's called Growth Unhinged. It gets published every week, and I share a lot of my insights there.
Yeah, and I just want to say to everyone, if you do not subscribe to Growth Unhinged, you need to. It's one of the most important sources of ideas and information and data about how to take B2B SaaS companies to market, what the emerging best practices are, what's really working in the world. And also Michael's research into generative AI and monetization strategies is, I think, going to transform how many people approach this. And there are links to both of these in the slide deck when you get it. Again, Stephen Forth, co-founder of Ibbaka, and passionate about value. And over the last few years, I've come to realize that generative AI is going to transform how we build B2B applications, how we configure them, how we move to dynamic configuration, and all of that is going to have a huge impact on both monetization and pricing. And that what we thought was best practices in the past is, I believe, going to change. I'm also a bit of a design geek. I manage the 380,000 odd member design thinking group on LinkedIn, where generative AI has become the central topic that many people are concerned about, both in terms of how these new applications are going to change design work and how they're changing user experience. So let's go on. That's a bit about us, but let's go on and find out a little bit about you. So we're going to have a poll here to get a feeling for where people are on their own journey and where they are on developing and monetizing generative AI products. So if you could just click on one of those radio buttons there, we'll get a feel for what people are doing. And Liam, I'll let you decide when we've got enough responses and we can share this. I would say for Ibbaka that we are in development and are thinking about pricing. But as a host, I can't vote.
Pretty much getting there. I'll give it another 20 seconds-ish. All right, I'm just going to end it.
Well, that's great that we have at least 2 people that have a whole portfolio of products in market and 2 that have a second generation product in market. And I think that we're going to see a big change between how people approach their first generation and second generation products. But let's go on. As most of you know, we did a little survey before we started this roundtable to get a little bit of information about what people are thinking. And one of the questions that we had is about people's attitudes to generative AI. And I do not think that these results represent the general population, because obviously people that take such a survey and attend such a roundtable are going to skew towards people who are really interested in generative AI. But these different attitudes actually color everything from what applications people are interested in to how they're approaching pricing. And we'll have a report on the survey itself coming up later. But Kyle and Michael, what are your feelings about generative AI itself? Is this an incremental innovation, or is it much more disruptive and transformative in nature?
It's a great question. I think that currently a lot of the generative AI products that we have access to as kind of everyday users or professionals feel a little bit more incremental rather than totally disruptive. I think the potential is that they become quite disruptive. There's some early adopter companies doing things in that area, but it's worth flagging that AI applications are not necessarily new, right? We've seen AI products come to market doing innovative things for more than a decade at this point. But I think what has changed is the ease at which people can start to embed the technology into other types of software programs to have more business value for customers. And that's what I think is so fascinating, is that now kind of the creativity of leveraging this technology is kind of getting unleashed, and we're starting to see more and more interesting developments. But where I'm expecting the most value to be created is not kind of just AI applications themselves, but the combination of software and AI purpose-built towards really specific problems and use cases that people have.
Would you say that, Bessemer's been talking a lot recently about vertical AI? Would you think that vertical AI is one way of thinking about this?
Yes, it depends on, right, the way you think about vertical. So if you think about vertical as highly kind of purpose built around solving a specific problem that a specific group of people has, absolutely. I think a lot of people equate vertical as industry vertical, and they're very siloed around thinking about, hey, this is software for construction or for legal or for insert industry here. And there's a component of that, right? Because those industries often have really specific problems they're solving. But to me, some of these interesting applications actually apply across types of people, but towards a very consistent type of workflow.
Michael.
Well, it's not my area of expertise, so I'll just give my, let's say, gut feel and experience on this. My deep feeling is it's going to change dramatically the way you consume and you build software. I think there were sometimes competitive moats around user experience, for instance, and that moat is somehow going to disappear, and that's only going to reinforce the importance of first-party data. So in my view, what it means is when you look at vertical or horizontal SaaS, some leaders could emerge. There could be a tremendous amount of value, and we already see it, right? When you look at the use cases around, for example, customer service, we know that you slash response time dramatically. You know that you increase number of response per time as a result, and customer sat is the same, if not better. So in many use cases, as it's going to refine, I think it's going to change the way people use, consume, and engage, right? So it could have a dramatic impact and could reshape, let's say, the loser and winners, especially those that would want to stay on older stacks. So I think it has a massive transformative impact, especially in the vertical areas. If I use just a parallel for a second, because I do a lot of software, but my background was manufacturing, and it's a bit like this moment in manufacturing, and Wolfgang in the Kollaga, who's a professor in B2B marketing, would commend that, right? When we moved from selling products, think of I'm selling a gas bottle, and I moved to selling compressed air. That's like a massive move. And this is what we're seeing, right? People do not want to consume software. Software was the way to access an outsourced service. And now we're putting agents, digital workers at work to actually do this on behalf. So I think that's right now, I would say that software is living its manufacturing moment, which may sound a bit counterintuitive.
Interesting. Can I just ask each of you how you use generative AI in your own work, and if there are things that generative AI applications have changed for you? Kyle,
yeah, well, it's a great question. I probably could use it more than I do, to be totally honest, but my main kind of favorite use case is perplexity. That I am a big fan of that. I will use that for some initial research on a topic, and I love that they cite sources and also give you, I think, just a more robust kind of answer. So it gives a head start around research, for instance, for blog posts. And then it's also, when I've got writer's block or need sort of a boost of creativity, I'll ask it to brainstorm options. Hey, come up with 10 subject lines for this kind of post. I find it helpful as that thought partner, but realistically, I would say the amount of sort of value I get is like incremental at the moment as opposed to transformative.
Michael.
I'm with you, Kyle. Exactly the same. So I typically use AI to if I have an idea, to make sure that I'm, me-see, as we say in consulting, that I didn't forget any interesting angles. I use it sometimes to, improve some of my writings. I want to have a specific style. As you can hear from my terrible accent, English is not my mother tongue, so it helps, make it sound a bit better than I would. So copywriting to some extent. But I would say where I get the most value, Stephen, and I hope my kids will not listen to this podcast, this webinar in the future, right, is to actually customize bedtime stories. To say that's a very powerful tool, and that's where I use it. Sometimes also cooking adjustments, what spice I should be using. So funny enough, Stephen, right now, like Kyle, the best value I get is more having some sort of a on-demand analyst if I were in a consulting firm.
So I'll just say, from my own perspective, like Kyle, I am a huge Perplexity user. I often have 4 or 5 tabs of Perplexity open, and I like the way that it allows me to use the same prompt on different models, because you get very different responses for different models. And I think this is actually strategically important, because I am not convinced that any one model will ever answer all of our questions. So like Kyle, I use Perplexity constantly. I would say it has replaced Google in about 70% of my searches. Inside Ibbaka, we are increasingly using generative AI as a QA tool. So we've found that we can output value models as JSON files, and we've been able to structure a system of prompts and structure a generative AI application to actually give us advice on how to improve the value model. And we're doing this across a whole spectrum of things. The other place that we're increasingly looking to use it is, at Ibbaka, we do a lot of scaling testing on both value models and pricing models, and sometimes cost models. And we're just in the first days of this, but we expect to really rely on these tools to deepen and expand the amount of scaling and interaction testing we can do. And that's really transforming our work. But why don't we go on? The next question we asked is, what impact will generative AI have on B2B software over the next 5 years? Here again, this is a highly skewed sample because it's people that are, I think many of the people share our passion here. But again, Carl and Michael, and this time, why don't we start with Michael? What impact do we think generative AI will have specifically on B2B software? And let's just use a 5-year time horizon here.
So I'd probably defer to Carl, because I think I actually answered too quick to the previous question, right? So I'm in line. I think the transform how B2B software is sold, developed, and supported, I think in my view, that's the big thing. That's one chunk. And the second chunk that I really believe in is enable many new applications. The way generative AI is used today by established SaaS player in many instances is to create a new overlay, better user experience, which makes sense, right? But in my view, it's a temporary fix in order to get things in motion and get user accustomed to it. It's important, right? But I think new players have an advantage starting from a new stack. That's why I think the enable many new applications in the future should become like the biggest thing. Because I think we're just at the beginning, and there's probably a lot more things we can do, especially when we're going to have transparent handover between agents to agents. So not only the way software is sold, developed, and supported, but also the way ecosystems are being designed between companies. And again, I hand over to Kyle, but just look like a company that I discovered thanks to Kyle's post, 11x AI, which is digital workers, right? On the go-to-market, right? Think of BDRs, think of sales, think of pre-sales. If you start having this, so what happens? Do you have a digital buyer in front of them in the future, right? So do you create ecosystems of agents? So I would add, something else, which is the ecosystem. So sorry, I said I would not answer, but I did somehow answer. But yeah, for me, I think it's a transformative force, which is hard to predict, but it's going to be massive, especially in terms of applying new use cases and ecosystems.
Yeah, well, they're a great example. So for background, if I profiled the founder and kind of the company story in a Growth on Hinge article a few months ago, they also recently announced a funding round in approaching, I think, 10 million in revenue pretty quickly. But what's fascinating to me is how they started with an AI SDR use case, although the idea is kind of broader digital workers for any type of professional job, and enabling a world where, a founder could build a 3-person unicorn, right? That Sam Altman talks about. But with their product, their product is actually their best source of pipeline. And so they're able to scrape the web, look at businesses that, if, for example, had a job posting for an SDR open for at least 60 days or at least 90 days, and it's still up. And so it's pretty clear, hey, you tried to hire someone, you weren't able to hire them. And so they can have their AI SDR identify that, right? So that's sort of an agent task, is identifying this at a target account, confirming that it's the right account, getting the contact information for the hiring manager or the buyer, then generating a personalized email that's basically, hey, saw you have a job posting up for this role. I'm AI and I could do this job at a fraction of the cost. We should talk. And then, they don't yet do the actual sales interaction. But that's a pretty disruptive value proposition. It's highly targeted to the right buyer. It's not a spray and pray outbound approach. It's very personalized based on signal that's available out online. And imagine if you were an individual SDR, you could do that same thing, but it would probably take you longer, and it's pretty expensive, right? Finding an SDR means multiple months of hiring, right? And then you've got onboarding and training folks. You then have to regular management to make sure their activity volume is at a certain level. If they perform well after a year, they want to graduate to be an AE. They don't want to keep being an SDR. And so AI can do this job, honestly, I think better than a lot of people could do it. And then the other thing it unlocks is, because this is technology rather than people, 11x.ai can charge based on how many completed activities you want. So you're essentially paying for a service, and how much of that service you need, you can scale up and down. And it's not fully outcome-based pricing. They're not guaranteeing that you're getting a certain amount of pipeline or opportunities, but you're paying essentially similar to how you would pay an outsourced worker. And I think that's the kind of value proposition that starts to unlock much larger budgets. So we think about how much IT or software spend is an organization. It's a relatively small amount of spend if you compare it to personnel costs and services costs at those organizations. And I just frankly believe, even though we've had a wave of great, user experience developments, a wave of product-led growth companies, most people probably hate using their software products. They feel like they have too many software products. A lot of them do similar things. They don't know what to use in different instances. They're probably underutilizing the products they do have. Many products are more of a system of record or kind of a glorified database rather than something particularly valuable. And so if you imagine the ability to pay for a service and have kind of guaranteed that service is done and done well, that opens up a lot of potential kind of technology spend in an economy, and just so much more business value for everyone involved.
Yeah, and I think, Kyle, you're making a couple of super important points here, which is that the monetization model can open up wallets and open up spending. I want to ask you about generative AI and go-to-market, but I think I'm going to save that for a future webinar because it's such a huge topic. We could spend the rest of the session on that. But the point, the really important point I think that Kyle is making, which everyone on this call should be listening to and thinking how they can apply it, is generative AI is enabling new pricing models, and those pricing models have the potential to unlock wallet. And Ibbaka itself is currently experimenting with AI-based SDRs, and the jury is still out, but we are seeing interesting initial results. I'll just leave it at that. And as Kyle said, the AI SDR that we use does things that you couldn't really expect a human to do. And it does that at scale and with a pace of improvement that is, I think, hard for a human to match. But let's go on and talk more about pricing now. So we did ask in the survey what kind of pricing metrics are being used. And for me, anyway, it was a bit depressing to see that the single most common pricing metric was per user. Now, how many decades have we been doing this since Salesforce introduced its SaaS and no more software meme? And SaaS pricing is still dominated by per user pricing. And that's true even with generative AI. But when we took this data though, and we applied the latent clustering algorithm to it, and what we found was something a bit different. We found that user-based pricing was actually the least common cluster, still pretty common at 27%, but the least common. That the pricing metrics that are associated with AI costs, and here I'm talking about tokens and models and speed and so on, were 36%. And that pricing metrics that are associated with domain-based pricing or vertical-based pricing were 37%. And there was a significant number of companies using outcome-based pricing based on the actual results delivered. So, and that I think is a really exciting finding. So we're going to do more analysis now that we have more data. There's probably been another 100 or so survey responses since we did this initial analysis. But the user-based pricing, I think in many cases aligns with products' current pricing metrics. And I hate to say this, but I think in many cases this is the default. We use user-based pricing, we'll use user-based pricing for Gen AI as well. The AI cost-based pricing, I think, is being used extensively by horizontal companies that have applications that serve many different needs. And it's very difficult to come up with a value-based approach because there are so many different use cases. And let's face it, generative AI is computationally expensive, and it is changing the dynamics, of SaaS businesses and how we think about and evaluate SaaS businesses. And Kyle, I'm going to ask you about that with your VC hat on in a moment. And then finally, the slightly more common than the cost-based approach was various approaches to domain-based, which I think is going to show up being associated with vertical AI. But starting with Kyle, do these align with what you're seeing in the market? And do you think that there's going to be a direction or trends here?
It's a great question. Well, so when I think about what I've looked at, companies that are, for instance, starting with an existing software product and adding AI capabilities, the vast majority of them are still doing user or seat-based pricing, potentially with some adjustments like with a usage cap, right, to protect costs. But it's not particularly creative or inventive pricing, but it is pricing that was relatively easy to ship with an existing fits with an existing billing system, fits with an existing way customers understand how to buy a product. And because the product offers a software value proposition and an AI value proposition, it does align reasonably well with how customers get value from it. But it's a kind of a V1 pricing, right? It's not this deeper think, if you were to think in an AI native way or a totally new way about what's the best way to monetize X product. It's probably not that you probably wouldn't come to the same conclusion. What I'm fascinated about is folks that are able to offer a pricing model that aligns with how customers want to buy and aligns really well with the value that product delivers. So you can capture more of the value, or overall you're creating overall for your ecosystem. And that also allows you to land customers in a frictionless way, because it takes pricing out of being a concern in the buying process, but then also uncap the upside that you have within a given account or across accounts, because your revenue is able to scale as customers get more and more ROI. And that's going to look different for different businesses. In the OpenView portfolio, one company I've had the kind of fortune of working with is a company called ChargeFlow, that I think is a good example for how this could play out, although they have unique circumstances as everyone else does. So they've identified a process around fraudulent chargebacks. And if you think about, like, you might buy a product as a consumer, maybe you bought something on an e-commerce site, maybe late at night, you forgot you bought it, and you see that charge on your credit card. You probably did actually buy it, but you see it on the credit card, and you go, hey, request chargeback or dispute transaction. That happens a lot. There's, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars annually in this type of chargeback that is all of a sudden very painful for a merchant to dispute. They have to provide a lot of paperwork. It's a back and forth process. There's really specific ways that the credit card companies want the information presented. You have to provide a lot of proof. What ChargeFlow has noticed is that many merchants are not able to handle this, or their win rate of these disputes is extremely low. And that their alternative option is often outsourcing to a services firm that is expensive, has minimum retainers, and is kind of unaffordable for a lot of businesses. And ChargeFlow says, hey, why don't we integrate with all of your systems? We'll integrate with Shopify, we'll integrate with Stripe, all of your systems. And then whenever one of these happens, we'll file the dispute on your behalf, and then we'll charge a portion of whatever money we're able to get back for you. In their case, they take a 25% cut, and they're pretty confident they can dramatically improve the win rate. And this is a kind of pricing model that none of the services firms can offer, because their cost is in paying people. They have to pay people salaries regardless of whether they're able to get someone their money back. And so it's a model that is very aligned with how customers want to buy. It's very flexible, right? It's tied to ROI. So it's been extremely effective, and has been a kind of factor in the company's explosive growth. I would say that type of success-based pricing is not the norm just yet. Many businesses are, for one reason or another, they are not able to charge directly on a success basis, which is fine. But for many of them, they look at a value metric that's tied to success or correlates with the success of their customers, but it's something more under their control. And so I see a lot of examples in AI pricing of kind of thinking about charging per unit of work completed. So it's successful, work product delivery, which aligns with, hopefully the ROI the customer gets, but it's something that's more under your control, right? Because you can't always control the success the customer sees, but you can control the work that you're able to do for them that gets to that success. So I see that as increasingly common. And the other thing is where I would maybe disagree slightly with this domain clustering is around tokens or credit pricing. A lot of that is cost-based pricing classically, but I do see that type of model as actually something that can apply well in an AI world. So to the extent that you have multiple types of output that you can deliver for a customer, or multiple types of work product, you could charge for those as essentially value metrics. But instead of charging for a specific amount of those for a customer, you basically offer them a retainer model or a gift card model where you say, hey, action A is 1 credit, action B is worth 3 credits because it's harder and more valuable for you. Action C is worth 5 credits. We're going to charge you a retainer of $10,000, right? That gives you 10,000 credits. Use those however you want. As you use more, we'll top up your number of credits. And that's a way to offer, I think, more of this domain-based pricing in a way that gives the customer budget predictability and some certainty around their cost, and that makes things just a little bit easier from a transaction standpoint.
I think Box has an approach that, Box is taking an approach like that. But Michael, I've got a sort of twofold question for you on this. So one is you've gone deep on more than 70 different companies. So the first question is, how does this map to your own research? And secondly, you work for Zuora, which is one of the world's most important subscription and management systems. How is Zuora itself? I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but how do billing and subscription management systems need to respond to the changes being driven by generative AI?
So that's going to be a bit of a long question. So I'll do my best not to do any repeats with Kyle. And Kyle, feel free to disagree, by the way, at any time. It's always good to have a healthy debate. So to keep it very simple, right? First, I think we need to see it in a dynamic way, Stephen, right? So this is a boiling pot, right? Monetization at the moment. We're seeing changes on a daily basis, and we probably mentioned that at the back end of the call. So let me try to first describe 4 things, Stephen, before I answer your question. Cost dynamic. We didn't speak so much about that. There was a question in the chat. Cost dynamic, right? This is what I call the Gym Club paradox, right? Unlike SaaS, the underlying cost of GenAI queries, the inference for application, horizontal or vertical, is material, and it's quasi-linear, which means each query adds up, and it's not small. So that's why the most active users can yield the worst margin if you price per user. So kind of like, we didn't really scream it right now, but it's important. So like Gym Club, you make more profits on subscribers that never come to the gym, right? So almost the same. The second thing is the copilot/autopilot dilemma. When you have a vertical or horizontal SaaS, and that's what you mentioned, Kyle, right? You're optimizing or automating a process or workflow, meaning that you potentially need less users to create more value. So if you combine these 2 factors, right? User seat-based pricing is pretty much dead for many types of software. We mentioned the manufacturing moments, but there's something interesting, right? We didn't discuss margins, and I know, Kyle, if you would confirm this, but what I hear from founders and VCs, it's typically 10 to 20 points lower in terms of margins when you are in GenAI. It's not a bad thing, right? It's just that the margins are different. It's different margin structure. But what's interesting is we used to be focused on cost of acquisition and cost of acquisition payback time. Now you have to be super disciplined in terms of operational cost and value, right? And that's why also we start to see companies willing to pass on these costs as an easy solution in some case to the end customer. Is it the right thing to do? I don't know, right? So I'll describe the numbers in a second, Steve. But that's something which is very much manufacturing when you think of it, right? Passing on the cost. And last, there's some sort of what I would call an inverted value pyramid, right? Before AI in SaaS, the higher you go in the chain, typically the more margin you get, right? In AI, right now, the GPU, NPUs, TPUs have more pricing power than the software layer. And if you specifically take LLMs, there's a price war ongoing when you look at ChatGPT, Gemini, Amazon Q. They're priced around $19.99, the consumer products I'm talking, right? So again, this is a weird moment, and we know there's massive value in some use cases. So if I wrap it up, right? Gym Club paradox, copilot autopilot dilemma, manufacturing moment for SaaS, inverted value pyramid. There's a massive forcing function to actually, it's an opportunity and a risk for GenAI companies to launch and find sustainable monetization solutions. So how does it fit, Stephen, to answer your question? Well, user-based, in my research, is about 40% of the cases. AI cost-based, which is what I call activity, right? You have an input, which is a user. You got activities, which are, for example, CPU, tokens, whatever. Then you got output, you generate an image, or you got outcome, which is what Kyle described. For example, the fact that you reverse a chargeback, which is, you get money back in your pocket. That's, so user is about 40%. All the rest, which I described, which is technically usage, hybrid consumption-based models, or mix of those, that's 52% in my research, to be precise. So what it tells me, to answer your question, Steve, is first off, it was a big surprise to me to see that a lot of traditional companies have already moved somehow away, partially or completely, from user-based. So they're aware of the problems I mentioned, and that's important. Now, the reason why we're not completely cost or completely value or completely outcome-based, I would say a couple of reasons, and I'd love your view on this. One, lack of value articulation, or ability to attribute or calculate value. When you look at the case that Kyle mentioned, most of these cases are industries or use cases in which the customer actually exactly understands the process and knows the cost. For example, we know that a ticket is $5 to $10 to solve in a customer service. You know how much is your chargeback. You know it, right, as a company. So if I can improve it, you can have direct attributability of the result. So there's many use cases in which it's very difficult to find this. Second is a human reaction. We're scared, we freeze because it's a transition, changing revenue model. So unless you're the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the sales rep, everybody's going to have an opinion. And of course, what do? You just stick to user, or you just inject some other metrics in order to yield or protect you against the cost. That's why we see a lot of companies having users and thresholds next to it. Almost say, look, you can use it, but be careful, don't use it too much, which is counterintuitive because you could prevent, and I think Kyle, you document that extensively, you could prevent individuals for using more of the platform and getting more value by putting thresholds on the wrong metric. And the last piece, in my view, is that it would be a journey. It would be a journey moving from user to something else. You'll need to create mutual acceptance. So not only you as a provider need to understand the customer value and the customer process and document it, but there has to be acknowledgements on the customer side. So my point of view is what you have right now is quite representative. I just see a bit more user-based, to be honest, Stephen. And the second piece is it's going to move directly towards outcome and output, but not everyone would be ready for outcome. There may be cases in which it would be too complicated to actually share or define the outcome, and pricing on the output, which is the activity, right, that you mentioned, Kyle, can be the right thing. But at the end of the day, we're going to see, in my view, most of people moving away from user-based pricing, and that will require a lot of managerial courage, especially for established players.
Yeah, I think on your point about the outcome or success-based pricing, I do agree. While that in some ways feels like the holy grail, right? Like that's seems to be the most buyer-friendly possible. And you could potentially tap into fairly large budgets that way. The reality is it often sets up really big attribution fights with your customer. So you want your customer thinking they're getting the best ROI possible from your solution. But if they're all of a sudden charging, 15, 20, 25% of that, they're going to start questioning, oh, I drove this myself. This wasn't from you. Or, this was a kind of business sort of organic factor that happened as opposed to our additional usage of your product. I even saw this back in my consulting days. We dabbled with some success-based pricing, because when you think about some of these engagements, it's a fairly high sticker price on an engagement, but then when you compare it to the potential uplift in terms of incremental revenue and profitability from optimizing pricing, like it was really small. And so you start to go, oh, maybe we can share in the upside. But that becomes really complicated later on to align on what the actual value unlocked was. And then it's also something in a software and AI context that value might fluctuate over time, or the people that are involved at the customer side might change, right? So people are going to come in with different experiences and understandings. And I tend to find that charging on a metric that's similar to kind of this output metric, not all the way to outcome metric, is usually a little bit safer unless you're totally bulletproof in your attribution around ROI for the customer.
Would agree. And Steve, if I can just answer the back end of your question real quick now, how do we react to this? I would not talk about the solution. I would talk about what we see in the market, which is interesting because, of course, hopefully we support it. The first thing is that when I look at our customer base, which is across industries, it's not just SaaS, what was striking to me is more than 40%, 40, are already using consumption models to some extent. It can be just a very small amount of revenue, can just be a overage fee to some extent, but 40%, and it's half of that, so 20%, that is doing intensive, meaning like meaningful revenues through hybrid models. And I invite you guys to read also Kyle's research on hybrid models, which is super interesting. So we kind of have, landing on the same numbers, from your research and what we see in our first party data, which is interesting. What we see as well is that usage/value/hybrid-based model, so not users, is how people want to buy when we ask IT buyers, which is a surprise. And it's more than 50% of buyers that want to buy GenAI, not per user. Then the other thing which is interesting, and we have it kind of on the data, you have it in your research as well, which is usage-based model yields higher growth. Of course, when there's a downturn, it's a bit more brutal, but still over a long time period, we see that consumption/usage-based model/hybrid have better results. And the last piece, which is metrics. And what we see is companies having more than one metric, so pricing metric or usage, so in our case, more than 3, have 2 times faster growth than those that have only one pricing metric. Okay, correlation, causation. You got to be careful. Maybe this is because they are multi-product companies, so you got to be careful. But what it tells me, and I'm from experience, and I'm sure Kyle, you've experienced the same. If you're a more metric, that tells me that probably you have a smarter way to find your ICPs, and probably you're much better at understanding the value drivers, and probably you're better at finding customer-friendly metrics, so you extract more and better value than those that have only one metric. So there's no cookie cutter, there's no simplification in the long term, and I think the path will be towards hyper customization of packaging and hyper customization of pricing metric. Long answer.
Well, I think
that works.
So
I think
guys,
the big thing, I was just going to add one thing quickly, Stephen. The big thing to me is that none of this is going to be possible if we follow the typical product development process, which is where product goes and has this idea of what to build, they build it, and then it's handed off to a pricing team or a marketing team of like, we want to launch this in 6 weeks. What should the price be? I think that the more strategic folks will incorporate, pricing, ROI, and willingness to pay into deciding what problems to solve and what is the best way to solve it, right? Is it Copilot? Is an agent-based approach? Is it software plus AI? Like, what is it? And if you're not thinking about monetization before deciding what to build, you're never going to unlock kind of the most disruptive and kind of value a creative strategy.
I think that's an incredibly important point. I want to leave some time for Q&A with the community that has joined us here. So I'm just going to quickly skip through these slides. Everybody will be getting the deck, and we're happy to answer questions. So it's nice to see value-based pricing as the most common approach. I'm also gratified to see some people choosing generative pricing, although I wonder how many people knew what they meant when they clicked on that choice. We are seeing really 5 different patterns in how people are packaging generative AI applications, and we'll share more information about this. And I think that Michael has some really important thoughts on what's happening in the market here as well. So we will dig deeper with Michael on this in the future. But I think there are some open questions that we should discuss. First is, what impact will generative AI's higher variable costs have on pricing and operating models? Michael, you shared your thoughts on this earlier, so maybe we can start with Kyle on this.
Well, there have been some interesting comments in the chat on this topic too. I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One is from a standpoint of funding, right? If you have the balance sheet and you believe that costs are going to come down materially, or that you need some initial adoption to really kind of build that product that's going to win in the market, you're probably not so worried about costs, right? You're more worried about adoption, creating value for customers, and then knowing that'll unlock the ability to adjust going forward. So there is a very sizable part of the market that has that mentality, and it's fine with potentially even negative gross margin products or having customers with negative gross margins in order to hopefully unlock a bigger opportunity in the future. I think with businesses that are later stage or that are publicly traded software companies, they don't have really that luxury right now, given the valuation environment. There is a premium on growth, but it needs to be balanced, kind of efficient growth and specific, kind of looking at Rule of 40 today. And so with those types of mature software businesses that are now monetizing generative AI capabilities, they are very concerned about costs and having unprofitable customers. And so for those folks, I think that they're looking at ways of protecting themselves with customers. So while customers don't necessarily know what their usage is going to be like, maybe there's a some sort of throttling capability, or hey, we're charging per seat but with a cap on usage, or they're going to look at pricing models that really make sure that they're confident that this isn't going to come back to haunt them, in 6, 12, 18 months.
Michael, you've sort of expressed your thoughts on this. And Kyle, I think has a huge amount of expertise on good, better, best pricing. But Michael, what are your thoughts? And what are the results of your research? Is GBB still a dominant approach to packaging among companies adopting generative AI, or are you seeing different approaches emerge in your research?
So I don't remember the number top of mind, but big surprise, what I assumed that GBB would be the main model, but it's actually not. And so first off, we see some single package models, because in the early days, some people don't know how to segment their packaging, so they just include everything in one package. That's understandable. We see GBB, but we see some a la carte type of pricing quite a bit, especially in the lower. No surprise, right? In the model layer. This is no surprise. What was my biggest surprise, Stephen, was the absence of what I would call function or job to be done orientated packaging. And I think, in fact, a company, again, coming back to 11x, that could make a lot of sense. Maybe not, right? But to actually package based on the different types of tasks you do. If you look at on the HR space, for example, a company like Lattice, right? They have this kind of packaging which is based on the goal. And I think, given the tenets of Gen AI, I think we're going to see a lot more approach of pricing, not on GBB, because in this case, GBB could be counterintuitively not provide a function that would maximize the metric that would yield a higher growth. So could prevent the users to yield the growth. So my view, and this is just a prediction, might be that GBB will remain an important model probably in the future, but that may not be the main entry point. And I think the future might be a lot more Gen AI or AI-driven packaging, as we see, by the way, in the media space, right? When you look at New York Times, they do dynamic packaging. So I think this kind of like consumer approach to packaging might appear in B2B. And I think GBB might not be in the future the dominant product. I was a big promoter. Every time I invest in startup, I would say, look, let's do a good bit of best. Let's find a pricing metric. That was my default script, if you will. I think that script is going to change. That's my feeling. I may be wrong. What do you think, Kyle?
Well, it's a great question. So to me, if I think about like why good, better, best became popular, right? Or my belief of why it became popular, it was a great way to present customers with a feeling of choice and then monetize more features, right, as we built them. And so you could help customers see that there's not just one option, right? There's a starter package that is, meets the budget. There's a middle package that's like that Goldilocks. Hey, it's got enough of what I need, but it's not too expensive. So it's a great way to upsell folks that were, maybe we're thinking about starter initially. And then you've got a best package that is usually your top customers as they see value. They want to upgrade and kind of use more capabilities, right? As you launch new stuff, you include it in that top tier package, but you also are just going to have more sophisticated customers that have much deeper needs, and they're going to kind of default into that package. So it's a great way of offering, kind of meeting customers where they were, providing that upsell path for folks, and being able to balance that kind of combination of feeling affordable while also monetizing what you're building. And I think that those concepts actually still apply in an AI pricing world. It's just how we think about what the packages probably look like are different. So in a software world, the packages that were higher tier were usually things that involved like additional customization, reporting, enterprise integrations, like things that felt like, hey, you're managing more people, with our product, or this is more mission critical for you, and so therefore you should pay more. I think that in an AI first world, the software capabilities are not necessarily going to be the core thing that we're monetizing, especially if we think about delivering a service for customers. They don't really care about logging into a specific part of the software. They care that you're solving this problem for them, and they're willing to pay, for solving that problem. But if you think about it as solving the problem faster, solving the problem with higher accuracy rates, solving the problem with like SLAs if something goes wrong. There's different ways that you can actually package up offerings for customers that tap into different kind of budgets and where they are in their adoption lifecycle, that take these kind of user psychology principles, but that just fundamentally look like quite different types of packages than what we're used to.
That was super helpful. I do want to get our second poll in before the end of our time together, because I think that will give people some insights to where other people are. So thank you very much, Liam. So what challenges are you facing as you move towards pricing your generative AI applications? Why don't we push this one closed, Liam?
Still going.
Okay, give them people a little bit more time.
Now it's slowing down. I'll call it at 1 minute. Right about now.
Okay, so that's super interesting. Where people are. Estimating economic value to the customer is a key issue for people. And I think one of the questions we're going to have is, can generative AI itself help us with that? I don't think we've got a lot of time left for Q&A, so I'd like to just invite Kyle and Michael to share some closing thoughts with us, and we will address the Q&A in follow-up with people and in blog posts. So why don't we start with Michael? Any last thoughts?
One very quick one, a bit of a provocative statement or not. In manufacturing for years, they've been looking at software companies as the North Star about what they should be doing, right? They put software in their machines. They've seen crazy margins of software and so on, and innovation and digital. This time, I think software companies might not be looking at the Silicon Valley for inspiration, but actually at manufacturing companies like Michelin, like Rolls-Royce, to actually help with the point we just saw, right, in terms of value articulation, value discovery. And I think that could be an interesting partnership or source of hiring of these value experts that are in manufacturing who have in-depth experience of articulating value. That might be my 2 cents, Stephen.
And Kyle, we're going to give you the last word.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of territory. I think the last thing I'd leave people with, especially if they're thinking about some sort of more creative pricing with, say, usage-based pricing, hybrid pricing, success-based pricing, is really consider the kind of user adoption story that happens with your product. And so is there enough usage for them to get, experience real ROI? Are they going to see, something sticky from adopting the product? And are you monetizing in a way that sort of maximizes on kind of output rather than inputs? And what I mean by that is, if you price based on seats, all of a sudden people hoard seats or share logins, right? Or say, hey, these seats are just for my team. You have to buy a separate set of licenses. But if you price based on usage, people often look at the taximeter and they're hesitant about each time they use the product. They know there's going to be a bill for it. And so maybe they don't put in that query in Perplexity or ChatGPT if they're paying per query, for example. And so as much as we talk about kind of value articulation and ROI, you also need to understand kind of the life cycle of user adoption and the psychology around how they think about price and how that relates to the long-term value they're going to get from adopting your product.
So Thank you very much, Michael and Kyle. I'm sure we could have gone on for another 2 hours easily. There's lots to discuss here. I'm going to invite you to have a follow-up session at some point next year. But I'd also like to thank Liam for orchestrating this and putting it together, and everyone who attended. I'm sorry we didn't have enough time to dive into the questions, but we appreciate all the comments in the chat. And we will see you again soon, that we hope. So again, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.